I have seen powerful men lose entire fortunes without shedding a tear, but I have only seen one lose his certainty because of a single quiet question. Ethan Calloway believed every problem had a solution, and in his world that solution usually came with a number written on paper. Contracts ended arguments. Checks erased mistakes. Generous offers turned enemies into strangers. After years of building one of New York's most influential business empires, he had convinced himself that loyalty could be purchased, silence could be rewarded, and distance could always be negotiated. That belief had never failed him until the afternoon he invited his own chef into his private study. The room overlooked Manhattan through towering floor-to-ceiling windows where the late afternoon sun painted the skyline in shades of gold. Every detail reflected discipline and precision. Dark walnut bookshelves stretched from wall to wall. A marble fireplace stood untouched beneath a portrait of Ethan's late mother. The air carried the faint scent of leather, cedar, and freshly brewed coffee. At the center of the room rested a polished oak desk, and upon it sat a black leather briefcase with both silver locks already opened. Inside, neat bundles of $100 bills filled every inch of the case. Exactly $1 million. Counted twice. Verified personally that morning. Ethan remained standing behind the desk instead of taking his chair. His tailored charcoal suit fit him perfectly, but the calm expression he wore concealed weeks of sleepless nights. Across from him stood Hannah Mitchell. She wore a spotless white chef's jacket beneath a navy apron dusted lightly with flour from preparing fresh bread only minutes earlier. Her light brown hair was tied neatly beneath a kitchen cap, and although years of hard work had strengthened her hands, they rested quietly in front of her without the slightest tremble. Hannah had worked inside the Calloway estate for nearly 4 years, long enough to memorize every family tradition, every holiday recipe, every favorite dessert, and every quiet habit of the people she served. Yet today she had no idea why she had been summoned away from the kitchen before dinner preparations were complete. Neither of them spoke for several long seconds. Even the city beyond the windows seemed strangely distant. Ethan finally reached forward and gently turned the briefcase toward her. "There is $1 million inside," he said in a steady voice. "It is yours if you agree to one condition." Hannah lowered her eyes toward the money, but made no effort to step closer. Ethan continued without hesitation. "Leave New York today. Leave this estate. Never return, and never contact anyone who works for me again." There was no anger in his voice. No accusation. Only the quiet certainty of a man convinced he was making the correct decision. Most people would have stared at the money in disbelief. Some would have argued. Others would have accepted before hearing another word. Hannah did none of those things. She remained exactly where she was, studying the open briefcase with thoughtful eyes before lifting her gaze to meet Ethan's. For the first time that afternoon, he noticed something unexpected. She was not afraid. She was not offended. She looked almost saddened, as though the offer itself had wounded him more than it ever could wound her. Hannah slowly drew a calm breath and folded her hands together. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was barely above a whisper, yet every word settled heavily inside the silent room. "Mr. Calloway," she said gently, "before I decide whether to take your money, may I ask you one simple question?" For a long moment, Ethan did not answer. The question lingered between them with a weight that neither the money nor the silence could overcome. He had spent years surrounded by attorneys, executives, consultants, and advisors, people who always responded to him with carefully measured words designed to satisfy him. Hannah had done something entirely different. She had asked for understanding instead of permission. Ethan slowly closed the lid of the briefcase without locking it. The sharp click echoed softly through the study. He walked toward the windows overlooking the city, his hands folded behind his back, watching thousands of strangers move through streets that looked peaceful from nearly 50 stories above. Without turning around, he finally spoke. "Do you know what money teaches people?" Hannah remained quiet, sensing he was answering more than her question. "It teaches them to wear masks. Everyone eventually wants something. A promotion, a favor, a signature. Loyalty becomes a transaction." His reflection stared back at him through the glass. "After enough years, you stop asking who people are. You only ask what they want." Hannah listened without interruption. Her calm patience somehow encouraged honesty more effectively than any confrontation ever could. Ethan continued in a quieter voice. For the past several months, confidential information has somehow left this estate. Private dinner schedules, vendor contracts, purchasing records. Every internal review reached the same conclusion. He turned slowly until he faced her again. The kitchen. Hannah's expression did not change. There was no shock, no anger, no attempt to defend herself. She simply absorbed the words with quiet dignity. Ethan reached for a slim folder resting beside the briefcase and placed it gently on the desk between them. Inside were purchasing reports, inventory summaries, delivery schedules, and administrative notes gathered over many weeks. Every highlighted paragraph pointed toward irregularities connected to food deliveries. Every recommendation suggested the same solution. Remove the chef before greater damage could occur. Hannah glanced at the papers, but never reached for them. Instead, she looked at Ethan. "Did you believe every page?" she asked softly. Ethan hesitated. That brief pause answered more honestly than any sentence could have. "I believe the evidence I was given," he admitted. Hannah nodded slowly. "Evidence can describe actions," she said. "It cannot always describe people." Her words settled quietly inside the room. Ethan found himself studying her more carefully than ever before. Nearly 4 years, she had prepared meals inside his home. She remembered every family celebration without reminders. She adjusted menus whenever guests had dietary restrictions. She quietly sent extra food to the overnight maintenance crew every Thanksgiving. Because she believed everyone deserved a holiday meal, whether anyone noticed or not. None of those things appeared anywhere inside the folder before him. The reports measured inventory. They measured invoices. They measured costs. They measured everything except character. Hannah's eyes briefly rested on the portrait hanging above the fireplace. The woman smiling in the painting wore a flower-covered apron beside a wooden bread table. "Your mother loved baking, did not she?" she asked gently. Ethan looked toward the portrait almost instinctively. "Every Saturday," he replied. "She said fresh bread made people feel welcome before they even sat down." Hannah smiled faintly. Then she understood something very important. Ethan frowned slightly. "What is that?" Hannah folded her hands together once more. "The people who prepare a home often protect it in ways no report will ever record." The room fell silent again, but this time the silence felt different. It was no longer built upon suspicion. It was built upon the uncomfortable possibility that the truth had been hiding in plain sight from the very beginning. Ethan lowered his eyes to the folder resting on the desk. For weeks it had represented certainty. Every page had appeared organized. Every chart had pointed toward the same conclusion. Every recommendation had assured him that removing Hannah was the safest decision. Yet certainty had begun to crack the moment she asked a question no report could answer. He slowly reopened the folder, studying each page again as though seeing it for the very first time. The numbers had not changed, but his perspective had. Hannah remained standing quietly across the room. She did not interrupt. She did not defend herself. She simply waited, understanding that truth often arrived more slowly than suspicion. Ethan noticed something that should have caught his attention weeks earlier. Several purchasing approvals had been signed on dates Hannah had not even been working. He remembered approving her attendance at a culinary charity conference in Boston during one of those weeks. She had been photographed there with local students learning community cooking programs, yet somehow expensive specialty ingredients had supposedly been ordered under her supervision while she was hundreds of miles away. He frowned. The inconsistency was small, almost invisible, but once he noticed it, other details began emerging. Delivery times did not always match security gate records. Inventory summaries sometimes listed products that never appeared on kitchen menus. Vendor invoices contained digital approval stamps instead of handwritten confirmations that Hannah had consistently used for years. Ethan looked up from the paperwork. "Why did you never mention any of this?" Hannah answered without hesitation. "Because I did not know anyone believed those papers more than they believed 4 years of my work." Her voice carried no bitterness, only quiet disappointment. Ethan walked slowly toward the bookshelf beside the fireplace where dozens of framed photographs documented family holidays, charity dinners, and business celebrations. Hannah appeared in many of them, never standing at the center, always somewhere in the background carrying trays, adjusting decorations, or serving guests with the same calm smile. She had been present for birthdays, anniversaries, Thanksgiving dinners, Christmas mornings, graduation celebrations, and countless ordinary evenings. Somehow he had remembered every successful event without remembering the person who made so many of them possible. His attention settled on one photograph from 3 winters earlier. A severe snowstorm had stranded more than 40 guests inside the estate after a charity fundraiser. Roads had closed. Hotels had lost power. Yet no one left hungry. Fresh soup appeared within an hour. Homemade bread filled every table. Blankets, coffee, and warm desserts somehow reached every guest before panic had the opportunity to spread. Ethan remembered receiving praise for how smoothly the evening had been managed. He had accepted every compliment without once asking who quietly transformed a potential disaster into an evening people later described as unforgettable. Hannah noticed him looking at the photograph. That was the night your elderly neighbor could not eat the original menu because of her allergies, she said softly. So we prepared an entirely different dinner just for her. Ethan turned toward her. We? Hannah smiled gently. A kitchen is never one person. It only works when everyone believes they matter. Those simple words lingered inside the room long after she finished speaking. Ethan realized every report he had read focused on mistakes, costs, and risks, while Hannah instinctively spoke about people, teamwork, and responsibility. For the first time since the investigation had begun, he found himself asking a question none of his advisors had suggested. What if the person everyone had overlooked was the only one who had been protecting the heart of the entire estate all along? The study remained unusually quiet after Hannah's final words. Ethan closed the folder once again, but this time he did not push it aside as though the matter had been settled. Instead, he rested both hands upon its cover, realizing how dangerous certainty could become when it arrived too quickly. For the first time in many years, he questioned not the people around him, but the process that had shaped his own judgment. He looked toward the intercom on his desk, ready to summon another meeting with his executive staff. His finger hovered above the button before slowly pulling away. Every report he had received until now had traveled through the same chain of people before reaching him. If someone had manipulated the information, calling another meeting would only warn them that their story was beginning to unravel. Hannah watched him carefully without speaking. She recognized the expression of someone who had just discovered that the ground beneath his confidence was not as solid as he had believed. Ethan finally looked at her. "Do not tell anyone about this conversation," he said quietly. "Report to the kitchen exactly as you always do. Change nothing." Hannah nodded. "I never intended to change anything." Her answer carried the same calm honesty that had unsettled him from the beginning. Ethan opened a desk drawer and removed a small leather notebook he had not used in years. It had belonged to his mother. She believed important observations should be written by hand because handwriting forced people to slow down long enough to notice details they might otherwise ignore. On the first blank page, he wrote only one sentence. Verify everything from the beginning. He closed the notebook and slipped it into his jacket pocket. "May I ask you something now?" he said. Hannah smiled politely. "Of course." Ethan hesitated, choosing his words more carefully than usual. "During all these years, did you ever think about leaving?" Hannah glanced toward the kitchen hallway where faint sounds of pots and quiet conversation drifted through the open doorway. "Many times," she admitted. Ethan looked surprised. "Then why did you stay?" Hannah answered without looking away from the hallway. "Because I never stayed for a paycheck. I stayed because every kitchen becomes someone's memory. A birthday dinner, a holiday meal, a quiet bowl of soup after a difficult day. People forget who signed the checks. They remember who made them feel at home." Ethan lowered his eyes. Those words reminded him of countless evenings when he had returned exhausted from meetings to find a simple dinner waiting, prepared exactly the way he preferred without ever asking for it. He had accepted those moments as routine instead of recognizing them as quiet acts of care. A soft knock interrupted the silence. Ethan's executive assistant stepped inside, holding a digital tablet. "Sir, your operations director has arrived for the purchasing review." Ethan accepted the tablet, but did not look at the screen. "Tell him I will meet with him tomorrow instead." The assistant blinked in surprise. "Tomorrow, sir?" Ethan nodded once. "Tomorrow." After the door closed again, Hannah quietly reached for the unopened briefcase and gently turned it back toward Ethan. "You should keep this," she said. "I have a feeling you are going to need something far more valuable than money before this is over." Ethan looked from the briefcase to Hannah. realizing that the investigation he believed had already ended was only just beginning. And somewhere inside the carefully ordered records of his own estate, the real story was still waiting for someone willing to question what everyone else had accepted without hesitation. The following morning, Ethan arrived at the estate nearly an hour earlier than usual. The mansion was still wrapped in the quiet rhythm that existed before meetings, deliveries, and visitors transformed every hallway into a carefully managed performance. Instead of walking toward his office, he made his way to the security operations room, carrying nothing except the worn leather notebook that had once belonged to his mother. He requested every original delivery log from the past 12 months rather than the digital summaries that had already passed through multiple departments. The security supervisor looked surprised but complied without asking questions. Within minutes, heavy binders covered the conference table. Ethan began comparing handwritten gate entries with supplier invoices one page at a time. At first, everything appeared ordinary. Delivery trucks arrived on schedule. Drivers signed the proper forms. Quantities matched shipping manifests. But the deeper he looked, the more subtle inconsistencies began appearing. Several expensive specialty ingredient shipments had entered the estate on mornings when Hannah had already been documented attending charity cooking events across the state. Other deliveries had been approved before trucks even reached the front gate. Even stranger, the handwriting on several receiving forms changed noticeably from one week to the next despite carrying Hannah's printed name beneath each signature. Ethan quietly marked every discrepancy inside his mother's notebook instead of relying on memory. By noon, he had identified nearly 24 records requiring closer examination. None of them proved Hannah's innocence by themselves, but together they painted a picture that no longer fit the accusation he had accepted so easily. As he prepared to leave the operations room, the elderly security supervisor hesitated before speaking. "Sir, there is something I always thought was unusual." Ethan stopped. "Go on." The supervisor adjusted his glasses and pointed toward one of the older logbooks. Chef Mitchell always signed for deliveries herself whenever she was here. She insisted on checking temperatures before accepting anything. But on the days you highlighted, someone from administration called ahead and instructed us not to bother her because she was supposedly too busy in the kitchen. Ethan slowly looked back at the pages. Who gave those instructions? The supervisor searched the records before finding a familiar name. Every time, the authorization came from the operations office. Ethan thanked him quietly and walked toward the kitchen instead of returning upstairs. Lunch preparations had already begun. Hannah moved calmly between the stations, tasting sauces, encouraging a nervous young line cook, and helping a dishwasher stack trays after noticing he had fallen behind. No one acted differently around her because no one knew the conversation that had taken place inside the study the day before. Watching from the doorway, Ethan noticed something he had somehow overlooked for years. Every employee instinctively looked toward Hannah whenever a problem appeared. Not because she held the highest title, but because she always responded with patience before judgment. When a server accidentally spilled a container of fresh herbs across the floor, Hannah simply smiled, knelt beside the young woman, and began gathering them together. "Mistakes slow us down," she said gently. "They do not define us." Ethan felt those words settle deeply inside him. He realized they described far more than a kitchen. They described the choice now standing before him. If someone had carefully built a false story one document at a time, then uncovering the truth would require the same patience Hannah showed every day. For the first time since the investigation had begun, Ethan no longer believed he was searching for a guilty chef. He believed he was searching for the person who had counted on him, never asking one more question. By the end of the second day, Ethan had stopped relying on summaries altogether. He wanted original records, handwritten notes, forgotten receipts, and every detail that had never reached the polished reports sitting inside executive binders. Piece by piece, the estate began telling a very different story. The kitchen logs Hannah had maintained since her first month were remarkably consistent. Every shipment was recorded by hand. Every refrigerator temperature was logged at the same times each day. Every donated meal matched inventory reductions with careful precision. Nothing appeared rushed. Nothing appeared altered. It was the kind of discipline that only came from someone who expected to be accountable long before anyone asked questions. Ethan quietly requested the estate accountant to review every purchasing authorization without explaining why. The older man spent nearly 3 hours comparing electronic approvals with original invoices before slowly removing his reading glasses. "Sir," he said carefully, "there is something unusual here." Ethan leaned forward. "Go on." The accountant placed 2 documents side by side. One carried Hannah's familiar handwritten approval. The other showed an electronic authorization supposedly completed by her less than 10 minutes later. "These timestamps overlap," the accountant explained. One signature was written in the kitchen receiving office, while the electronic approval originated from an executive workstation on the 3rd floor. The same person could not have completed both. Ethan remained silent, allowing the implications to settle naturally. The accountant continued reviewing more files. The same pattern appeared again and again. Digital approvals had quietly replaced handwritten records whenever expensive specialty purchases were involved. Someone with high administrative access had inserted changes after the original paperwork had already been completed. Hannah had unknowingly become the name attached to decisions she never made. Ethan thanked the accountant and left without calling anyone else into his office. Instead, he walked through the estate alone, seeing familiar places through entirely different eyes. In the staff dining room, he noticed framed photographs from charity events Hannah had organized without publicity. Hundreds of meals had been prepared for local shelters every Thanksgiving. Scholarships for culinary students had quietly been funded through anonymous fundraising dinners she coordinated after regular work hours. No press releases. No recognition. Only simple notes thanking volunteers for giving their time. He paused before another photograph showing Hannah teaching neighborhood children how to bake bread during a community program his foundation had sponsored years earlier. He vaguely remembered approving the funding, but had never attended the event himself. One sentence printed beneath the picture caught his attention. "A meal shared with kindness feeds more than hunger." Ethan found himself reading the words twice. Later that afternoon, he returned to the kitchen entrance, just as the dinner rush reached its busiest moment. Orders moved quickly between stations. Pans simmered. Fresh herbs filled the air with their fragrance. In the middle of the organized activity, a young cook accidentally overcooked an expensive cut of beef. The room briefly grew tense. Before anyone could panic, Hannah calmly stepped beside him, showed him where the temperature had risen too quickly, and quietly began preparing another portion alongside him. There was no criticism, no embarrassment, only instruction. The young cook smiled with visible relief and immediately regained his confidence. Ethan watched unnoticed from the hallway. In that simple exchange, he understood something every investigation had failed to measure. Fear could make people obey, but only trust could help them become better. As he quietly turned away from the kitchen, another thought settled into his mind with unmistakable clarity. Whoever had constructed the false trail had understood paperwork exceptionally well, but they had overlooked one crucial detail. Character leaves evidence too. It simply appears in people instead of files. The breakthrough arrived quietly on the 3rd morning, not through a dramatic confession or an unexpected witness, but through a single overlooked detail that had remained hidden inside ordinary paperwork for months. Ethan sat alone in the estate library with his mother's leather notebook open beside a growing stack of invoices, security logs, and purchasing records. Every page he reviewed confirmed the same uncomfortable truth. The evidence against Hannah had not been discovered. It had been carefully assembled. Someone had built a story one document at a time, trusting that no one would ever compare the originals with the edited versions. Ethan requested one final report from the Information Technology Department. He did not ask who they suspected. He asked only one question. Which executive account had accessed the purchasing system after business hours during the dates already marked inside his notebook? Less than an hour later, the answer appeared. Every unauthorized modification traced back to the same administrative credentials belonging to the Estate Operations Director, Daniel Mercer. Ethan read the report twice before setting it down. Daniel had worked beside him for nearly 7 years. Organized, dependable, always prepared with polished presentations and immediate solutions. Ethan suddenly realized that every recommendation to remove Hannah had also originated from Daniel's office. Later that afternoon, Ethan invited Daniel into the study under the pretense of reviewing quarterly operations. The conversation began exactly as every previous meeting had. Vendor performance, budget projections, staffing plans. Daniel answered each question with practiced confidence, never noticing that Ethan was no longer evaluating the presentation. He was comparing every answer with the original documents spread quietly inside the desk drawer. When Ethan finally placed the handwritten kitchen logs beside the altered electronic approvals, Daniel paused for only a fraction of a second. It was brief, almost invisible, but long enough. Ethan calmly slid another document across the desk. It contained the computer access records confirming every late-night modification. Daniel attempted to explain them as routine administrative corrections, but each explanation created another contradiction instead of resolving the first one. The room gradually filled with a silence neither man could escape. Ethan did not raise his voice. He simply asked, why did every correction place responsibility on the one person who never approved those purchases? Daniel lowered his eyes without answering immediately. The confidence that had carried him through countless meetings slowly disappeared. Ethan finally understood what had happened. Hannah had never been chosen because she was guilty. She had been chosen because she was trusted enough that no one imagined she would defend herself publicly. She worked quietly, accepted responsibility without complaint, and never sought recognition. She was the easiest person to blame because she was the least likely to accuse anyone else. Ethan closed the folder gently. You believed I would examine spreadsheets before I examined character, he said softly. No further explanation was necessary. By the time Daniel quietly left the office pending a formal internal review, Ethan remained standing beside the window, reflecting on how close he had come to making the greatest mistake of his career. Down in the kitchen courtyard, Hannah was helping two new employees unload fresh produce from a delivery truck, laughing warmly as she showed them the proper way to inspect vegetables before accepting them. She had no idea that the truth had finally caught up with the lie built around her. Watching from above, Ethan realized something that no report had ever measured. Competence keeps a business running, but character keeps a home standing. And for the first time in many years, he understood which one truly deserved his trust. The following evening, every employee received an unexpected invitation to gather in the estate's grand dining hall before dinner service. Housekeepers stood beside gardeners. Drivers stood beside servers. The kitchen team arrived together, still wearing their aprons after preparing the evening meal. Quiet conversations filled the room as everyone wondered why Ethan had called a meeting with so little notice. Hannah entered last, wiping her hands on a clean kitchen towel before quietly taking her place near the back, assuming she had simply been asked to attend like everyone else. At the front of the room, a long walnut table stood beneath the crystal chandelier. Resting at its center was the same black leather briefcase that had remained closed ever since the afternoon Ethan had offered it to Hannah. The sight of it immediately stirred curiosity throughout the room. Ethan stepped forward. Only after every conversation faded into silence. He looked around the room slowly, meeting the eyes of people who had worked beside him for years. Some expected another announcement about security procedures. Others assumed organizational changes were coming. No one anticipated what happened next. Ethan took a slow breath before speaking. Several days ago, I made the most serious mistake of my professional life. The room became completely still. He continued in the same calm voice. I accepted accusations before seeking the truth. I trusted documents before remembering character. And I nearly allowed an innocent person to carry the weight of a decision she did not deserve. He turned toward Hannah, who stood frozen in quiet surprise. Chef Mitchell, would you please join me? Hannah walked forward slowly, unsure what was about to happen. When she reached the front of the room, Ethan faced her directly instead of addressing everyone else. I owe you an apology, he said. Not because the investigation was difficult, but because I should have trusted 4 years of your integrity before believing 4 weeks of carefully prepared reports. I forgot that a person's character is built over time, not summarized inside a folder. No one in the room moved. Several employees lowered their eyes, remembering how easily they had accepted the rumors without questioning them. Ethan placed a sealed envelope on the table beside the unopened briefcase. This is your official appointment as Executive Director of Culinary Operations for every Callaway property in New York. Effective immediately, all purchasing decisions, supplier approvals, culinary hiring, and kitchen standards will report directly through your office." A quiet wave of surprise moved across the room. Hannah looked at the envelope but did not reach for it. Instead, she asked softly, "May I ask one more thing?" Ethan nodded immediately. "Anything." Hannah glanced around the room at the faces of the people she had worked beside every day. "Please promise me this will become a lesson, not a punishment." Most people believed what they were told because they thought they were protecting this home. "I do not want fear to replace trust." Ethan smiled gently, recognizing once again why she had earned everyone's respect long before receiving any title. "I promise," he answered. "Anyone who acted honestly will have the opportunity to learn. Accountability should restore integrity, not destroy dignity." Only then did Hannah accept the envelope. Ethan rested one hand on the unopened briefcase before quietly sliding it toward her once again. "The offer has changed," he said. "This is no longer payment to leave. It is simply yours if you ever believe it belongs with you." Hannah smiled warmly, closed the briefcase with both hands, and gently pushed it back across the table. "Thank you, Mr. Calloway," she said. "But the thing I wanted most cannot fit inside a briefcase. I only wanted the truth to be given the same chance that suspicion received." The silence that followed was unlike any the estate had ever known. It was the silence that appears only after pride steps aside and respect quietly takes its place. 3 months passed, and although the Calloway estate appeared unchanged to every visitor who arrived through its front gates, the people who lived and worked there knew they were no longer the same. The marble hallways still reflected the morning sunlight. Fresh flowers still welcomed every guest. Elegant dinners still filled the calendar. Yet something far more valuable than luxury had quietly settled into every room. Trust had returned, and with it came a warmth that no amount of money could ever purchase. Ethan discovered that his favorite part of every day no longer took place inside the boardroom. Instead, he found himself walking into the kitchen just after sunrise, carrying a simple mug of black coffee while the first trays of fresh bread emerged from the ovens. Hannah was always there before everyone else, checking ingredients, greeting every employee by name, and somehow making the busiest room in the estate feel peaceful. Her new title had changed her responsibilities, but it had never changed her character. She still thanked the dishwasher before anyone else noticed his hard work. She still remembered birthdays without writing them down. She still quietly prepared an extra breakfast for the elderly groundskeeper who arrived before dawn each morning. Recognition had finally found her, yet humility never left her side. One crisp autumn morning, Ethan watched a young pastry assistant accidentally ruin an entire batch of croissants after setting the oven temperature too high. The young woman looked devastated, apologizing repeatedly as she fought back tears. Hannah walked over without the slightest trace of frustration. She placed another bowl of dough onto the counter beside her and smiled gently. "Recipes can be started again," she said. "People should never believe one mistake defines who they are." The young assistant smiled with visible relief and immediately began working again. Ethan quietly looked away, realizing those words described his own journey just as perfectly. Later that afternoon, he invited Hannah into the estate library. Resting beside the fireplace was the same black leather briefcase that had started everything. Dust no longer covered it because Ethan had intentionally left it where he could see it every day. It reminded him how close he had come to measuring a person's worth with money instead of memory. He rested one hand upon the briefcase before looking at Hannah with a thoughtful smile. "There is something I have wondered ever since that afternoon," he said. "If I had never offered you that money, would you ever have told me what you truly thought?" Hannah reflected for a moment before answering. "Probably not." Ethan looked surprised. "Why?" Hannah glanced toward the kitchen, where laughter drifted softly through the open doorway. "Because people only hear the truth when they are ready to question themselves," she replied. "Until then, even the kindest words sound like arguments." Ethan lowered his eyes and quietly nodded. He finally understood that the question she asked on that first afternoon had never been meant to win an argument. It had been an invitation for him to become a better man. Without another word, he picked up the briefcase, carried it to the office safe, and locked it away forever. Some memories deserved to remain, but some decisions deserved never to be repeated. As evening settled over the estate, the aroma of fresh bread filled the hallways once again. Ethan accepted a warm slice from Hannah, thanked her with genuine gratitude instead of quiet routine, and realized that the greatest lesson he had learned had never been written inside a report, hidden inside a contract, or stacked inside a briefcase. It had been waiting every morning inside the kitchen, carried by someone who never asked for recognition because she believed dignity was its own reward. And on that day, everyone inside the Calloway estate remembered that true strength is never measured by the power to command others, but by the courage to admit when you were wrong, restore what was unjustly taken, and honor the quiet hearts that keep a home standing long before anyone notices they are there.